Yeah, it
I
was
can't see
plenty.
it.
And welcome to Live with TLD episode 179. You can see our special guest. Croak was on earlier. He said the special guest is Walsh. No, it's not. I told
No.
you. I even did the plural. Special guests. So we have Jawa on. Jawa was on last week talking about the CQB course, and then we have Jesse from Defense Mechanisms Defensive Elements is the training arm, I believe.
Correct.
So we're going to be talking about the CQB training that these guys went through, and it's kind of be a Q&A session for Jesse and for our viewers to ask CQB related questions. So Jesse, Tim talked a little bit about on the podcast about you guys doing thousands of hours of training or 1,000 hours of training every year. But what got you into doing training? And then is that Walsh's cat? Yeah.
Yeah, just hold on.
Well, he's gone.
No worries. Yeah, so it's probably 2009, 2010. At the time, I owned a holster manufacturing company for like Kydex holsters. I was just doing it out of my basement, like a small thing, and got invited out to like basically a basic handgun class with MDFI. It's Michigan, Training or Firearms Training Institute. And that's kind of like, I went out to that class, obviously having my military experience. And I thought like, man, I'm just going to blow this class out of the water. Like leaving here, this dude's going to be offering me a job, like I was the best of all the shooters of my friends. And so, yeah, I brought a buddy along with me, Nick, he's a fellow instructor at Defensive Elements. And we went and took this class, and immediately in the class, like, I wasn't the worst shooter. I was probably like top 3, but it showed me immediately that like I had never looked at training in that way, of like, oh, having a set regiment when you go to the range, the skills to actually do what you wanted, and when it was performance on demand, I couldn't actually meet the full standard that the instructor had put out there, and that really made me like take a humbling look at my whole training path at that point. Because it was like a lot of, flat range. It was a lot of draw from the holster on my own time and stuff. And it really started to show me like, oh, okay, this pool's a little bit deeper than what I was actually thinking. So that kind of got the training bug bit for me. From there, I just started taking like a whole bunch of different classes from, you name who of instructors out there. And really just started to see like how deep that ocean of training got. And through that, it gave me a lot of context on gear that I was using and just different things, and basically set the shape for what was, defensive elements in the future.
Yeah, and we had a comment that chimed in. So Nate, our favorite libertarian, says, "Well, if it isn't my old training buddies, what's up, dudes?"
So we should have kicked you out. We should get the whole team back together. Like we had everybody. Hey, what's going on, Michael Farley? So just so you guys know, a little bit of background. I know I've been gone for a little bit. I went to the class with Jesse and Tim and Jawa over here, where they did that awesome class, and then I was gone for vacation for a little bit. So it's good to see everybody again. I don't think I've had an opportunity to talk about it, but I do have some good questions for Jesse. I think we have a bunch of things to talk about when it comes to CQB. But the number one thing I want to know is it that challenging? Is that class normally that challenging for most people? And I say that because we had, like, I don't think I wasn't brand new to firearms, right? We have some people who are super experienced with that in that class. Like, I thought the skill sets were wildly varied, but I don't think anyone I don't feel like anybody crushed it. And I don't feel like it's something you go into just crushing. And like you said, it was a very humbling thing. And Joe, you correct me if I'm wrong, but after the first day, I had to go back home and like figure out how I was going to like be able to succeed in the class, because like my mentality, because it's not physical. It's not like, oh, you have to lift this thing, you have to run around. It's you mentally like, what do I need to change in my mind so that I can succeed in this class? And I think that was the roadblock a lot of us kind of had to go into that first night, because it was like, wow, this is humbling. So I know I'm kind of getting way into it, but is the difficulty kind of a standard?
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, everybody comes in with a different background, right? So everybody has a base skill level and certain things that they're going to be good at here. And then it's like anything. When you're first learning a new skill, obviously sometimes it takes a little bit of going backwards to then progress forward, So for some students, we're undoing a lot of bad habits
Mhm.
that they've had from previous training. For some students, we're starting at scratch square one. And I will tell you, most of the time for the newer students, like predominantly like females, come into our class and do excellent, right? Because I think there's some ego, obviously, to the
Mhm.
male, as well coming in. Obviously, we've all played video games, we've all watched movies and action movies growing up, so we already have like preconceived notions of what CQB is. And this class, again, quickly like shuts down what a lot of those preconceived notions are. So, for some students, like, is the difficulty level the same? For sure. If you come back to the class, right, like you're going to see it's very much the same class over, unless there's things that have been incorporated to make the procedures and the systems better. But every time that you learn it, right, like you're starting to put things down like into that myelination of the brain, like getting them into midbrain. So the first time, for sure, it's drinking from a hose, right? Like you're learning all these new procedures, you're undoing bad habits. But then as you start to pass through this, you realize like, okay, like it's less difficult, right? Like
Yeah.
again, there's just struggles that everybody has coming into it, and it's just different for everybody. Some people it's weapons manipulation, some people it's safety, some people, again, it's speed, it's aggression. Like everybody's got to kind of work within what is, their boundaries, and I think this class really shows you what the full spectrum of these skills looks like.
And it's sorry, Jason, one good example he brings up, and I don't know if you watched Hop's video this week, but he talked about he's basically had three things he didn't learn at Thunder Ranch. And in that Thunder Ranch training, they go full safeties off the whole time.
Oh
Right.
yeah.
So, and they're like, that's how we run the whole class. Where with in Jesse's class, it's a safety violation if you safety off on a no shoot, which makes sense and like, explain it like, hey, like think of it like it's your family or someone,
Yeah.
some innocent person, and you just safetied off and you muzzled, you looking down the muzzle at him like, how did you assess that? How did you get to that point? Like what level of training brought you to that? Like,
Well,
so,
we've talked about something not really in a CQB sense, but weapon lights. People that only have a weapon light and don't have a handheld light. Well, especially like in the law enforcement world, I would think if you're searching a room, I understand if you're searching a house for officer safety during an arrest warrant or search warrant, like yeah, weapon light is fine. But if you're searching the house, the house that you think is clear, and there's some kid in the back room, and your only flashlight is the one on your gun, well, now you're lasering this innocent with your because you have a flashlight instead of having a handheld light,
but you
and
think so, but that's one of the things like I had to break out of too. Like Jesse, and it's funny because I wish I could take all these points from the class
yeah,
and like put them all in order of him yelling at me about the same thing. I'm like, Walsh, are you even watching the corner that you're looking at? I'm like, no. I was like, I know because your flashlight is dead ahead like an idiot. I'm like, I know, I am fully aware, but like the same too will come like, and I had to just slow down to such an insane degree where I would come into a room and what you didn't do, because which is what we all were trained to do. Sorry, Justin, I'm stealing your thunder. You
Yeah, no.
come in, you see something, and you instantly go into your optic, right? And it's every single one of us. I can say it because I did it. I know Joe did it. Every single person. So you basically take your whole perception of view, and then you narrow it down to a toilet paper tube, and you're like, oh, great. Now I can see just about nothing. I can't assess anything anymore. And having the flashlight, we would stay way more in a low ready, and it's like, okay, you keep it at the baseboards basically, so like you could see, below somebody's waist. Obviously try not to, you don't want to point a gun at
yeah.
somebody, but at least you don't have it in their face. But yeah, I think I could
Yeah.
more clearly do it with flashlight. Sorry, Jesse, go ahead.
No, again, like obviously you're talking about using light as a tool, right? And like you were just kind of saying, I want you to think about this in the context, because CQB comes from like the movies or GWAT, right? And
Yeah.
what I think this package really does is it breaks it down to what is the citizen or the standard law enforcement officer. It brings it into a domestic role, right? Like the CQB that we're doing overseas has completely different ROI, has
Right.
completely different priority of life. Whereas this CQB here obviously is tailored to what is the U.S. citizen, and I think as we start to go through this, like obviously safety has to be paramount in the training environment. But what you quickly see is exactly that. Like think of your family member getting pulled over by the police, right? And maybe they get like a call that, hey, there's been a kidnapping. This car matches the description. You come up on them, justified to have the gun out, right? How
Yeah.
long do you want them to keep that gun on your family member until after they realize that it's not the person they're looking for, right?
Yeah.
It's instant. And that's the same thing with this. So we have to have ways that we can put the gun into safe positions that we're not actually muzzling people that don't deserve to be put muzzled, right? So and we also then have to have ways that we can use the tools on those guns from those positions. And,
Right.
with modern technology, lights are so bright that we can use some of the spill, again, to, be able to determine in PID what is actually needs to be shot. Like everyone thinks this whole sequence of shooting is faster. And, we'll talk on this of like people will immediately Groucho walk, right? Because they're not comfortable mounting the gun. So the way that we teach carry positions, like in a low ready, I should be able to turn my head both ways. But what you constantly see is people want to keep like their cheek to the stock well, right? And what I want like everyone at home to do is like put your fingers out like this, and keep your head up so you can just see your fingers in your peripheral vision. And then I want you to just drop your head. And right, notice what happens to your fingers. They completely disappear. So guys are walking around in this
Oh,
staggered
yeah.
stance. They're crunching down. Also, like here's the deal: the brain is a muscle, right? And muscles they require oxygen to like be good, So it's like all I'm doing by putting my head down like this is I'm cutting off oxygen, which is then starving my eyes and my brain, which is the vision to process the actual problem. And now I'm trying to like look through my optic mounted, which is taking the world from this to like 40 degrees, you know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, so you're already putting yourself behind the curve. Whereas if you keep a heads up shooting position, you actually come in, you take your point, you see what you actually need to see, determine, okay, this person needs to be shot. Where do I want to put those rounds? Account for offset. I promise you, you're going to have time to deactivate the safety during that and press the trigger, right?
Yeah.
But guess what? The difference is those first rounds are actually effective. And, when we start to look at like new students coming in, it's like, they want to go fast because that's the imitation of the movies. But
Right.
what you clearly see is it doesn't lead to good decision making. And we've done the research, right? Like we've done the research at Alliance on just even flat range classes because, we don't really talk about when to deactivate the safety very early on just to be able to collect data on this. And it was like students that were immediately deactivating the safety as soon as they shouldered the rifle were like 70 to 80% more likely to shoot a no shoot target when we translated that to the shoot house later on. So it's like, from the flat range, you're ingraining these bad habits that then
Yeah.
lead to, not actually working out when it comes to the environment having a say and actual innocence and good people being around.
Well, we got a Doc Cypher said CQB is not easy, constant learning, and even then you can't train enough for it.
I think it was just like the perspective of it all too. Like so many things I had to relearn as a good way to like we're talking like even with the safety, right? It's almost like a second stage of the trigger because exactly what Jesse said. You go into a room and you just like come up safety off fire, like because that's what you learned how to do. That's what you trained yourself to do, and you go into your normal training stuff. It's interesting because Jesse, I didn't share this with you yet, but I was putting together a video for Sunday and some other ones of lessons learned on CQB. I was watching some of the footage, and it's interesting how the pace of the class goes in reverse. Whereas like everybody at the beginning, you watching all these people just racing, me too, like racing, blast the dude with the radio. You're like, bro, he's not even holding anything. He's not even holding the gun. And everyone's racing around like lunatics, like looking like goobers. And then at the end, everything is like it's almost boring. And that's probably what you want as an instructor is like it's slow paced. There's communication and decisions being made. Oh, it's time to move. Okay, we're gonna move with purpose, but then we're gonna hold and we're gonna assess. So there's a target. Okay, I'm assessing the target. I'm communicating with the target. Like the target, Jester would be like, he's shooting you. Like, okay, he gave me some clear determination that's a threat. So it was just interesting that it kind of went backwards. Java, I don't want to. We kind of stolen the thunder from you. So what were kind of your like that first day where we really had to like look back on the building blocks. What was your kind of mentality shift having to go from day one to day two?
Well, it's definitely not as much drinking from a fire hose right away. Because, like we said, as soon as that first day, it's like, okay, we're going to go do a run. It's like, all right, great, I'm in the door. Now what do I do?
Yeah, we just stood there.
It was just gone.
Yeah, it was a long day too. Those were long, and it's a lot of information, a lot of long days. So it's just a lot of stuff coming at you.
Mm-hmm.
So
and studying was huge, and being able to bring that back the next day, I think definitely helped.
Yeah, and Jesse talks about it too, like how a lot of it you just have to ingrain. It wasn't, and I didn't get to share this with you either, but we play this game called Ready or Not, and it's a kind of a CQB game. Jesse, I did mention it to you, but it probably took us like an extra 3 hours. Like this, so there's a barrel release, and barrel release basically means it's your buddy. You're telling your buddy you're good to go. But in the class, we would barrel release ourselves like all the time. Even watching the footage, I would watch myself do. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that, and I'd barrel release and then just go. And it wasn't until we like did a couple hours together of playing where it's like, okay, dude, I'm giving you the clearance to go. You lead us out the door. And it just takes so many reps to just get it right.
Well, I'm curious, Jesse. So like in the law enforcement side, I've gone through some CQB training that the bureaus put on. I've done some active shooter training. What have you seen on the I feel like your schoolhouse is more geared towards the everyday civilian, but I'm sure you have law enforcement folks that come through. So what are the bad habits that you see from law enforcement guys coming into the class that you kind of have to break them out of in order for them to perform well in your guys' class?
I mean, to be honest, the biggest hurdle that we go through is just safety, right? Most officers, like, again, from a lot of CQB schools of thought are like, hey, man, it's CQB. It's inherently dangerous. Like, you're going to see a muzzle, you're right? You're going to get muzzled. And, we just got to be more professional than this and da-da-da. And it's like, what you really see is like the true level of professionalism is being in a position that's heuristic, that we have procedures for, so that we can just rinse and repeat problem after problem, rather than have playbook CQB or have like who's most alpha CQB or have like hall boss CQB. Like there's so many bad programs, and really it just comes down to like people haven't seen a better way, and like they just don't put the time in to figure out how it's going to be professional. And that's just because honestly, most people don't do it enough, right? Like when you look at this at the highest level of it, FBI, HRT, like Delta, obviously, SF Elements, like Sephardic School, like they're running a very similar package with some enhancements that are because obviously like they're Olympic level athletes, right? Their processor and the amount of mat time they have doing CQB is much more than what we can get to the standard law enforcement. But this package in particular allows obviously you to have a heuristic set of responses, right? To be able to work with anybody that comes up. So because Walsh has this program and you have this program and another guy on your department has this program, well, now all of a sudden we can link up because, like being law enforcement, you might go to a burglary call and it's you and one other guy. Like you don't have the SWAT team with you, So the whole basis of this package is obviously a two-man CQB procedure, because you can do it one man, but obviously most of the time with the shapes procedures, you're going to have more angles of exposure to deal with than angles of attack that you have, right? With two guns, we can mitigate this by, using our shapes procedures. So honestly, like I said, most of the time it's safety. Cops obviously have bad posture a lot of time. They're so used to like Groucho walking and being really tight into the gun and, keeping their eye through the optic. They're really bad about over penetrating the room, right? They want to run all the way to the corner or want to run halfway into the room because, again, just aggression, They're really bad with like safety manipulation and actually being online to shoot. Yeah. So I think those are like the hardest things. The things that cops tend to be the best at is verbal communication with targets, and, target identification,
Sure.
because it's something that they do, pretty constant. So
It is interesting too, because exactly the things you mentioned, the things we did were like, I saw a civilian and you're like, hey, Walsh, are you going to like do something about him? And I'm like, I guess come this way. Okay, he comes this way. Okay, okay, I'm getting the game now.
So it's almost like Dungeons and Dragons, but with guns.
A little bit, because I mean, God, I mean, wouldn't it be horrible if somebody had this is the way I thought about it, is, we see a guy, he's holding a gun to his side.
Yeah.
Is that you want to say like, oh, fire, oh, shoot, because I'm
Yeah.
in this CQB situation, but like, yeah, but have I actually determined that's a threat?
Well,
Could be like, sorry.
Right. No. I think, man, I think we had this, maybe not, but I'm remembering a conversation where police officers came to a door of, there was a call about a burglary or something like that. So they come knocking on this door in the middle of the night, and the homeowner answers the door. He at least walks up to the door with a gun in his hand, and there's a side window. And so the cops see him through the side window, just shoot him because he has a gun in his hand.
Yeah.
Come to find out, he was the owner of the house. He might have died, but so cops aren't the best at being able to identify stuff. I mean, no one's perfect, but I like this idea of taking time to identify and then communicate what you're saying and what you do. Croak says, "I cast magic missile at the darkness."
That's a good joke. Something that I thought was very interesting too, and Jason, you can tell me if you dealt with this at all. Jesse would refer to it as they called it shooting at the back of the bus, which really means like you're the last guy in the formation. You somehow got into this mixed jumble. You're in the back, and you're the one shooting, right? So basically, same as we do on the flat range. Hey, you're not going to shoot with somebody in front of you. You're going to be at least in line with each other. And that's what Jesse taught us a lot in the class. Everybody and all the instructors, you had to fight for your position to be able to take a shot. You can't just be in the back row.
Right.
In the video I was talking to Jesse about this today. There were so many videos I found from so many apparently top tier agencies of guys taking shots from the back of the bus and just hoping and praying that their buddies aren't going to move. You know what I mean? Because these same guys taking shots, one guy just has to be like, oh, I'm going to get in that too. Well, you just got clipped because someone behind you is being dumb. So, Jesse, is the shooting from the back of the bus something that is, we talked about this a little bit today, and I'd like to get more into it, but is it something that's kind of allowed in the more special forces, or they just don't care about? Or I don't know. It just seems something where's
it coming from?
Yeah, because we super harped on it. Like, if you even started to turn and you're about to bring your gun up, you're gonna get blown. You get the air horn blown at you because you're not online. But I saw some wild stuff, and I guess my question, like, there's so much emphasis from us on it. Why is there not from other people? From what you know?
Yeah, man, I think it's kind of you get what you accept, right? Definitely doesn't come from like the highest levels of this, because like I said, the highest levels of this, like if I showed you both of the packages, you'd be like, oh yeah, those are basically the same thing, right? Whereas, what happens is, again, the watered down effect. Obviously, a lot of CQB programs, again, come from like a GWAT background and infantry background, where, there is the priority of life is the mission. Whereas, in obviously this context, the priority of life is citizenry, it's yourself, it's fellow officers, it is what your life is, So I think obviously the back of the bus isn't like, it's not something that's taught. What you see is it's very much out of natural instinct, right? When bullets start flying at you, you want to solve that problem, right?
Yeah.
So it's very easy to
rear.
turn and then think that you can get in. The problem is, without proper training, without the proper context, right? Until you see the videos of like, officers doing that and their buddy gets hit and gets taken down and then gets canoed in the back of the head. Maybe he had a very survivable vest wound, and now all of a sudden is dead because his buddy, was trying to shoot from the back of the bus. So, I think it's what you accept. Obviously, when, most of the time You've got to teach what definitively being online is, or then creating enough lateral distance that you give yourself a reactionary gap to be able to do something, you know? So being definitively online is obviously like it plays into your stance. What I've showed people in the class, right, is like depending on your partner's stance. A lot of people want a very bladed stance. And again, this comes from like old school army of like creating a lower profile, right? Same thing with like the single snake of death. Obviously, like when we're walking through the jungle on like these little goat trails and shit, like being in a single stack formation makes much more sense, right? As you got to big open territory, what does your formation do as you're patrolling? It opens up, right? But somehow we started to think like, oh, we want to get out of these hallways. So we started putting like single file, operators in a row, which then creates a one-on-one gunfight for most people. So, I think a lot of this has come through us, like bad training has then created these circumstances of where it's very easy to want to shoot from the back of the bus. The difference is we hold a higher level of professionalism, right? A higher standard from the jump by showing you what definitively online is, what a proper stance looks like to actually put plates and armor and ballistic protection, right? Like your gun is also protection, and being in a fighting stance that you can shoot most accurately from makes the most sense, and then we hold that standard. I show you in class what a simple half a step does to being online, right? It takes it from where we can't possibly muzzle each other to like, one of us can get muzzled. And I'll tell you, it's never the person in the back of the bus that feels bad about it, right? It's always the guy up front that's like, ooh, I don't know about this, man.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I guess if you have enough seniority to make sure you're always the back of the bus guy, then it's fine. But like, I would like to know that my teammates are firing on a higher professional level and can actually get up online and fight for that right to party and get in there with me. And plus, it lets me know their action, right? There's no better feeling than feeling your partner come up and plant his foot right by your side when the shit's going down.
Yeah.
It is funny you say it too, because as soon as the rounds would start to go, like, we do top of a tee or something, and we'd split off, and one person would start shooting, and then the other person would just forget everything they've been taught and be like, I need to get into that, and then just do something crazy. Like, no, stop. Like, you have to get, like, don't just muzzle the whole room. Don't just do crazy stuff. Like, get online. If you made it to the fight, you didn't. You made it. If not, you didn't. Like, but don't try to obliterate it.
Example.
What's that, Joe?
The corner fed room thing is a perfect example of that.
So what's the corner fed?
Yeah, go ahead.
room?
Get into details.
So when you go in, you got one guy that button hooks right in the door, and then you got another guy that's just a couple steps in on the door.
So it's
and
a
if
long
he
side.
swings, he's muzzling his buddy, and if you don't get down and get online or create lateral distance,
Yeah, it makes sense.
And we saw that.
What you see is in some of these rooms, like there's just not enough room to get lateral distance, right? So that's why, and like, again, the whole part of this is it has to be scalable, right? So we can't have what is one-man CQB, what is two-man CQB, what is three-man CQB, what is five-man CQB, right? Like this package has to then work throughout. So like the problem with just, even in those shapes of just turning with your gun is somebody's already filling in that position in a team role, right? Right now, like in this class, it's a very two-man context and it's you and a partner. But you got to think, later in life, there's three other teams in the house. If that's your profession, where like somebody's already filled in, and you just turning with your gun like that is just put a muzzle straight into them,
Well, the idea, I think, it sounds like what you're saying, Jesse, that if people take if you have more people take this training, then a two-man team should be pretty easy to turn into a three-man or four-man or a five-man team if you've all been taught the same fundamentals.
And I'll take it one step further, because I told Jesse this is kind of one of the most interesting things, because the way it's taught in simple basic shapes, and we were all up late talking one night, and Tim agreed with this too. If you had one person who knew it, right, they could teach somebody else the shapes fairly quickly, and they'd basically be on the threat side or the movement side. The one side is going to be a little more complicated than the other in most positions, but it wouldn't be that hard to just teach one other guy, be like, bro, I'm going to tell you when to go, and then we're going to split this way, and then we're going to do this, and like understanding and being able to see the, like, grocery store. So you see a grocery store, hey, at the long hallway, we got a 4-way. We're gonna turn to both. Look, this is what I want you to do. And then if you don't see anything, come back, join me forward. We're gonna keep moving that way. So just having one person know the shapes, I think you could still do a lot.
Yeah, I love that. And so for those that are joining us, I'll say that we got Jesse from Defense Mechanisms on, and Jawa, who went with Walsh into one of their classes. We're talking about CQB. There's a couple comments that I was laughing about. So California Conservative said, on the eve of Juneteenth, I still can't believe we're not able to shoot from the back of the bus in America today. I thought we were past this. Josh says, I can't do CQB. When someone says pie, I just look for a fork and a plate.
We no pieing. We don't do that.
See,
only big boy stuff here.
All fat kids at heart.
So Jesse, one thing. Sorry, Jesse. Go ahead. I got a question for him.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Go ahead.
You and I have talked a little about how this course kind of has a pattern, and for those people who are interested in getting into it, the one that we went into, Joe and I, was the Anatomy of Structures course, which is just learning the shapes, learning doors, learning breacher and assault. We do know. Listen, we could do some pretty cool stuff. I mean, poorly. We could do cool stuff poorly. That's what I can do at this point. So can you explain to people who may be interested in getting into your class what I don't know, just do because I think it's such a long path. What's kind of like 3 or 4?
So is the Anatomy of Structures class, is that considered a beginner class for defensive elements?
Yes.
Okay.
And it kicked, let me put that in perspective.
The only prerequisites for Anatomy of Structures is obviously know and live the 4 life safety rules, no basic weapons manipulation and safety, and not be a felon, basically. Other than that, you can show up to that course. Obviously, the benefit of it is it's a UTM course, and for us, safety is paramount. So
I'll be super excited that, if I get Jason, if I get you and TLD Joe, TLD Joe, and me and Joe Terzo for the second time, we'll rock you kids.
Did you realize how slow TLD Joe and I would go through those things?
You would do nothing but make Jesse happy. Honestly, if you blasted through it, be like, what are you idiots doing?
Well, I think I told Walsh this story. Maybe I mentioned it last week, but I went through an active shooter training, and they were the scenario was a schoolhouse. We actually had an old schoolhouse that we were doing the sims in, and it was one man clearing. And so I get into the first room, clear it. I'm going across the hallway to the second room, and bad guy's down the hallway, and he has a simulated grenade. So throws that, it goes off. I know the bad guy's down that hallway, so I beeline down that hallway, and hostage comes out, and you're wearing masks because they're sims.
Right.
Everyone's kind of wearing long sleeve flannel shirts because UTM's hurt. But I popped the hostage twice, and it was a good friend of mine. And he's slumps against the wall, he goes, "You shot me," and slides down on the wall. And I just ignored him, went past because there was still the threat. And so the instructor afterwards was like, "Why didn't you stop and help the hostage that you shot?" And I was like, "Well, there was still a threat. Sorry that I shot that guy." But this kind of, as you guys were talking, I was thinking, man, if I would have been taught how to be slower and make sure I positively ID who it is that I'm aiming at and what I'm shooting at, that wouldn't have happened. That shouldn't have happened. But in the law enforcement scenario, sometimes bad things happen. He looked kind of the same. He was about the same height. I could probably justify, if that was real life, why I might have took someone's life, and nothing would probably happen to me. And that sat really wrong with me. So from that point on, PID was super important to me, because I thought this could be real life where I really did shoot a hostage who really did die. And it was all because I didn't positively ID my threat. Man. That's what really stuck with me.
Yeah, definitely not an uncommon reaction to that, right? And again, is there always going to be training artificialities of things? But here's the thing, right? If we can't do it perfect when we know that we're using paint bullets and that, we can't actually get hurt, it's people think we're just going to rise to the occasion then, when it's for real. And it's no, it gets more chaotic, bro. There's now, instead of the 5 role players that we could get there's 50 fucking people, and it's good luck trying to make good decisions for the first time ever with all of that going on. So again, obviously it has to be taught that way, right? Like you have to crawl before you can run kind of deal. And like,
Yeah.
unfortunately with CQB and most just gunfighting in general, like dudes think they do three things really well. And it's like, we fuck really well, we drive cars really well, and we can fight really well. And it's like most of the time without training, like you do none of those things well, you know? So it's not till like you get to see the spectrum and again, have the context, right? Like that's what classes like this do is they show you scenarios like that. So that way, like the first time you're in it isn't for all the marbles, right? We can look at that and go, oh man, that sucks. But now I have a lesson learned. I have myelination built up. So the next time I see something similar to that, I have a heuristic response of like, hey, don't just shoot here. I've done that before and that was a mistake. I actually need to look for a second, you know? And for sure, like I said, the more you do this, the more that becomes evident, right? Like the more you get into force on force training and you're getting different cues of body language and gunshot noises and things like that. Like some of these decisions get easier, but also it's still chaotic. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard gunshots go off indoors. Like if you think you're going to be able to dial in and be like, it's that room over there. It's like, you're not, you know, if you think you're going to be able to zone in on people going past you. And again, this becomes even the position of having good ready and carry positions. Like think of it on the opposite side. Another officer's responding. You're, you know, at the mall with your family, active shooter breaks out. You're trying to just get your family out, but determine like it's time for you to get your pistol out. Like you're now moving through crowds of people. How does your body language like tell people that you're not the active shooter, right? What ready and carry positions do you have to be able to keep that gun kind of concealed and actually be able to move throughout the structure in a safe manner where you can meet angles of attack with or angles of exposure with angles of attack? Like, you know, again, this is the importance of it's not what most people think in CQB, right? It's not like we're the SWAT team going in and clearing. That's a part of this for sure. That's more as you get to like teams and things later on down the package. But like anatomy of structures is very much like, I'm at the gas station. I might have to make it out of here, right? I'm at the supermarket. I might have to make it out of here. I hear that bump in the night. I might have to get to my kid's room, right? Like it's not all of a sudden becoming John Wick. It's just showing you how to move in and around other people with a firearm, how to make good decisions with a gun in your hand. Because like Walsh was talking about, like we put a gun in people's hand and they can't even walk normal anymore, right? It's like all of a sudden it's like, and it's like, man, no, you were just talking to me normal. Just walk like that. And like same thing, they just want to run through shit. And it's like, bro, like we were just walking through here earlier. Like it's paper targets in the house. Like if I can't get you to control your emotions now, how do I ever get you to do it?
Michael Farley says it's not just indoors. The property I used to work at has so many buildings, and if I heard gunshots, it could sound like it came from the opposite direction because the sound bouncing off buildings. Croakwood is an obligatory Twitter or X comment, so good to see you from Twitter or X.
But so Jason, I think the humble pie I had to eat on the second day was like slowing down to such a hilarious amount. But Jesse, I think they in a way they understood what I was doing. Of like I'm having to racing through anything. I know you're, don't assume you know what to do at all. Right. Like assume you know nothing. So it's like, okay, so is that so go ahead.
No. So I got a question for Java then, because he was your partner, and there's Walsh freezing. His screen keeps freezing. So being his partner when he's, I mean, did you guys have a chance to talk about, hey, when we go through this next scenario, we're going to go snail's pace, or was it a surprise for you that all of a sudden you're like, why is Walsh moving so slow?
No, it was definitely discussed. Like, because in between runs, we all could go back and like talk to each other in like the classroom while everyone else is making the runs, or up on the catwalk we could kind of talk. But up there, it's more of a learning experience. Up there, it's more valuable up there than in the classroom for sure. Because you could see everybody do everything that you just did wrong the same way you just did it, and be like, okay, I'm not the only one who's still having trouble. Like the whole low ready thing that messed me up with the undercover cop. I couldn't see his belt line. That's right where the top of my optic was, and he had a little badge right there, and he had a gun, and I put 2 in him.
And my buddy, I heard my buddy taking a shot at somebody. What did I do? Helped him out.
Oh yeah, so that reminds me
sympathetic murder.
One of the things, sympathetic murder. So one of the things that the last place I worked at that they were big on, because we did a lot of training where we were doing CQB with groups, usually 2 to 3 people. And the big thing that our instructor was a prior SWAT dude out of I forgot where, but anyways, he really harped on when you enter a room, like whatever area you decide to cover that area and trust your officers, the other officers, to cover their areas. So if they were engaging with someone, they were yelling at someone, show me your hands, come out from behind the counter, come out from wherever. I think the inclination is I want to see what's going on. That whole like rubberneckers on the highway thing. Instead of no, I need to control. Even if I'm staring at a empty room, this is my right. This is my threat area. I need to trust my officers to do their job behind me and not focus on what they're doing because maybe I'm going to cause more of a problem.
Well, it's something Jesse taught us was the priority of the threat that exists takes precedence over the threat that doesn't. So in that
That's
situation, if like we turn a corner, Jaw was yelling at somebody, hey, dude, so and so and so and so. But here, like, hey, put the bottle down. I'm gonna look and I'm gonna like pay attention to what's going on. Like, okay, we're both. He's controlling the situation.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back to what I do. But it's same situation. Hey, put down the gun. And now he's communicating with him. I've now come online and
Okay.
I'm in position of like. And Jesse's like, he's shooting at you. Like, well, that is my key. That is a bad guy.
Yeah,
but
absolutely. Like we have principles, right? Like this is the difference of this CQB package versus every other CQB packages. Most CQB packages are a playbook CQB. So if this happens, we do this. If this happens, we do that. We have procedures that are set up. So like again, one of our procedures, like one of our principles of CQB is support your partner. We do that in many ways. Obviously, communication, doing our job appropriately, like you said, like trust that your guys are doing your job. I can't be watching you do your job and be doing my job. But one of those in support your partner is the fight that's happening now supersedes the fight that could be. Right? Like how stupid does that sound in context of like I'm looking at a blank wall, my buddy's in a gunfight, but I'm like, bro, good luck. Good. I hope you got this. Because I trust you. It's like, no, man, again, like hit a carry position. We look, we get up online, we fight for our right to get into that party, and we fucking put that bad guy away, right? Like, that has to be that way, because what if he loses that fight? Guess who's next in that fight? It's you. And if your back's turned to it, it's no good, right? So it has to be a heuristic response to that. I hear my partner. Even if he's engaging in verbals, right? And for sure, if I dig my corner and realize there's something there, well, guess what? I have work to do too. Now we're both in it. But like the likelihood of in the continental United States going into an active threat and having multiple gunmen is like this percent, right? So it's like, again,
almost
we have
zero.
To train for all scenarios, but we have to be able to have principles and procedures for what are the most likely scenarios, And again, that's going to cover the 99.9%. And maybe we deal with something crazy like, well, fuck, there's an attic crawl space there. We don't have a real good procedure for that one, right? Well, that you've been taught, there is like a procedure going on, but like, in the basics package, it's like, well, that doesn't really fall into an LT or 4-way. Like it's not a typical door procedure, but it gives you at least things of like, okay, like this is how I'm going to, work with this within the confines. And then that allows you to look at every other training, right? When you go to other classes for CQB, you get to look like, well, do they have principles of CQB? Like, do they fall within these things? Do they have set procedures, right? Like, and it can't be a book this big of procedures, right? Because I got to be able to have a very automatic response to very like common things that we're seeing, which is obviously going to be shapes within the structure. It's going to be door procedures and it's going to be room procedures. And it's like, if you can just break your world down to those minute problems and then deal with those problems as they actually come up, like a task versus priority list, like it's very easy to look at an overall situation and get overwhelmed by like, oh my God, between me and here, there's 19 doors, which is 19 angles of exposure and all this things like to then look at like what's very in front of me, right? Like what's the very next step? Okay, this is the problem. Well, once I knock off that problem, then I can start to work my way down that list, right? Like instead of looking at the overall of like, well, it's 18 problems deep. It's just solving one problem at a time, which makes a major difference in how much bandwidth you're using. Like this is all processing power. And that's the deal. You're set with whatever processing power you have. What we're trying to do is limit the amount of actual information you're processing in the movements of what you're doing. Those are second nature for you at that point.
So Doc Cypher commented, I took a DECM course. A portion of our 12-hour training lane was in a shoot house CQB. 18 Delta was our CQB instructor. During the training, the amount of full back potato everyone went just doing basic things was comical. And then he said, shoot, move, communicate seems easy until you're actually trying to apply it fundamentally.
Jason, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna ask a question to Jawa.
Okay, well, what just to tee on what you said earlier. So when we went into day 2, I told the entire class, like everyone, like I want to be the most accurate. I want to be, this. I want to be the that. On the second day, I was like, I want to be the slowest guy. And like that is my goal. Like that is my goal for today because I want to be completely no ego. I want to listen and learn and have every movement be intentional. If I'm gonna and looking at the footage, I can see Jesse's face of like, God, this is so boring. But it's perfect though because like, okay, like I'm ingraining, and by day 3, it's like, okay, the speed started to pick up again because you're basically taking your whole building block, tearing them down, rebuilding them, assess the threat, come up on your optic, do your offset, safeties off. Like I would like say them all in my head, like, okay, actually learn these things instead of like, oh, I know what I'm doing. Like, oh, that's an innocent. Sorry. Go ahead. Talk to.
No, so last week, Jawa, you had talked about some of the training that you had been through, like on flat ranges, not really CQB type stuff. And I didn't ask you last week. I'm curious if your experience is the same as most people, that when you're training, let's say pistol shooting, the more you draw from the holster and engage whatever target, the faster you get. Do you think taking that same idea would apply to the CQB? Like the more often you train CQB, then you could do this more effectively faster.
Yeah, for sure. Just because your brain learns it all and the processor speeds up compared to when you're just learning it, where everything's going through a bottleneck. It just doesn't come as out of a fire hose as fast because your brain processes it faster than that. And
Okay.
definitely, like even just playing that game, me and Walsh play, it's like we're like, all right, well, we got this, and this. It's like, oh, that was quick. Like we're already even just. It's just so easy to put it to everyday life. Like I'm walking around, just going through my house. I'm like, oh, I got a 4-way. Oh, corner fed room.
Joshua says TLD coach shoot house when?
Whenever Defensive Elements finishes their class, their facility, maybe we'll all go over there and do like a big class.
That'd be fun.
But it is interesting, because even taking all this stuff home, like you learn so much stuff. We went into the class and we're like, we're gonna play this game exactly how it's we're doing it in real life. We found the melee button is actually a barrel release, which is hilarious because we would barrel release and then we'd kill hostages and feel real bad. But like we would barrel release and like, okay, so we're gonna go into this. I'm barrel release. I'm gonna let you take the T. Okay, what's the next shape? Okay, it's the bottom of a T or it's a 4-way. And even what we played 2 days ago, we were waiting to come back from vacation to practice CQB, and it was. We play for hours and you just get so much faster towards the end of like, here's the shape. Okay, I'm on your left side because, obviously you're playing video games, so you can't feel them. But so it just became so much faster and easier. Then even the beginning, we're like, okay, wait, stop. What do I do? No, you go. Okay,
Sure.
I motioned you. Don't motion yourself to go. So it is 100% mat time. Like even just brain processing.
So Jesse, on the instructor side, what would you say is I think a lot of the things that you're going to be teaching is important, but it sounds like listening to these guys talk, effective communication is kind of paramount. Do you guys teach how to properly communicate when you're going through CQB during this Anatomy of Structure course?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Again, so the way that we break communication down is obviously you have verbal and nonverbal, and then you have the acronym that we use is RIC, right? So you have routine information, important information, and critical information. Again, your brain's a processor, right? So what we want to keep our communication to is critical information. So we do this in a verbal way of saying, obviously clock directions, on you, on me, hold, and then just calling out dead space into the room or threats by priority, right? So our threats by priority would be people, portals, places. Obviously, people being the most important. They're the ones that we're there for. They're the ones that can cause us harm. portals are where that harm can come from that we can't see, and then places that people are hiding. Most people that are curled up on the floor behind something aren't in immediate fighting thing. So again, that's why we put them in that level of priority. And then we break down how we communicate these things, right? Like, it doesn't make sense to come into a room and tell your buddy, like, hey, I've got a purple and pastel couch over at my 130. Like, how much time is that taking him to then be
Yeah.
like, okay, what's 130? What's purple and pastel? What's he need out of that? Hey, I have dead space at my, 1 o'clock, or my, and we wouldn't even use that. It would be 12, 6, 9, and 3, right? So
Yeah.
that way you just know, like, okay, it's in this direction. Nonverbal communication. Obviously, we have to have ways that we can converse non-verbally. We do these through posturing, right? Like, just my body language can tell my partner that he knows that I know my job. I'm locked in over here. He's locked in over here, right? Like that, you can look over at your partner in that and say, like, how much more confidence do you have in the guy that's doing this on a position than a guy that's doing this and he's like looking over here? It's like, you don't know what that guy's doing,
Yeah.
So
He
just
doesn't
simple
either.
body posturing, it will be communication to your partner. And then obviously we have barrel releases, laser communication. But the important part is that, again, we're trying to keep it to the critical information. Trust that our partner knows the procedures and is going to have a heuristic response to this. And again, you hear it in even these guys, right? Like, you hear Walsh talking about he's watching himself now in footage and is able to see. Well, that's exactly what these procedures are designed, is that you can immediately see what wrong looks like,
Right.
and know what right looks like. And the beauty of that is, of course, in the heat of the moment when we're processing under stress, are we going to make mistakes? Yes. But this is the beauty of having a team and having a principle of support your partner, is when your processor's lacking, mine might be up at full bandwidth, and I can bring you back in by just a simple, hey, 4-way on you, and now all of a sudden you're like, oh, I know what a 4-way is. I know exactly, and it's on me. I know what my job is. And now all of a sudden you're back at it. So, like, when you talked about, like, how does speed come? It's through efficiency. Like, everybody confuses, because one of our principles is violence of action, right? Like, we're not teaching like a pine. We're like teaching, like, again, be online, get into that fight, and take every corner like you're expecting a fight to be there, and be surprised when it's not, because it's worse the other way. If you're surprised by the fight, well, then you weren't ready for the fight. So again, what we're trying to do is apply pressure. So speed isn't a tactic in itself. It's a byproduct of efficiency, right? So once you learn to be efficient, and in the beginning, like, you're trying to process through all of these procedures, right? You're like, okay, I just took the L as the inside man. And you're looking at nothing, but rather than get yourself in a position where you can put your gun on the next angle and basically tell your partner what the next shape is, instead, you'll stand there and look at nothing, and then think through what is the next 3 steps that you're about to do. You know what I mean? And then as you go to do them, you'll forget halfway through. And the guys that you see that have been through this program, that are doing it at the highest levels, they just don't waste time in those. They're not running through the house any faster than you. They know what the next job is, and they know what the next job is from the next problem before they even start moving their feet to it. So they'll hit a shape, they'll see nothing, they'll fucking immediately go to a carry position, turn, look online, see what the next problem is. As soon as they bring their gun up, it's telling their partner they're ready to move off. And then again, our angles are already telling us what the next shape is. A barrel release happens, we just hit the next shape. So you start to see how it's just rinse and repeat of,
Right.
it's a shape procedure, it's a door procedure, it's a room procedure, it's a shape procedure, it's a door procedure, and then we just deal with any threats that come up in it. And when you start breaking the world down to that, it becomes so much more simplistic. And then if your partner messes up and he takes the wrong shape, or he's not giving you the barrel release when you know he's supposed to be, you have a simple communication of, hold. Hey, man, I just see an L to the left. And he's like, oh, fuck, I was seeing it as the top of a T, right? You're totally right, man. Let's get on the same page. And that's how we keep more guns in the fight. That's how we keep the pressure on the structure. That's how we have relative superiority, which is a smaller force attacking a greater force, right? Like, these guys are dug in. We're coming into their territory. We've got to have principles and procedures that leave us on the same page. We can't get to the door and figure out who's opening it. We can't get to the door and be like, well, you're more aggressive, you be assaulter. Like, no, it just has to happen naturally. We have to know our job. And this is the, like, what you hear commonly in CQB is like, look for work, you know,
Right.
but now having had the class, you have a different context of it. Is there always work to do? Fuck yeah, there is. But sometimes that work is just being a good partner and doing your job and being ready for what is the next thing. Some of it is clearing the work so your partner can do his work, right? Like, there's so much more to what is support your partner and what is looking for work than what the internet gives it credit for.
So there's a couple comments I want to touch on real quick. Yeah, go for it.
What I want to mention is the communication too. We like, and I don't know if I drove Joe crazy with it, but I think the piece, like, you try not to talk about everything, but you have to start somewhere, because you have to you're both learning and your skill level 0. So when I'm standing there and I see like an L, and then all of a sudden like Jawa would barrel release me, it's like, bro, I have no idea I have no idea what you see. So we had to, you kind of had to step it back and be like, at the beginning, it was a lot of conversation, and it really goes away as you start to learn more, and then it can go so far as like saying, hey, what shape do you see? Oh, I see this. And even now we're getting to the point of like, okay, hey, barrel release, I know we both know what we see, and if you don't understand it, then we'll hold. But otherwise, barrel release, I'm on you. Let's move, and hey, move, hey, 4-way.
Real quick, Walsh, we got a comment in there it says basically a new, what's a barrel release? So barrel release it's a definitive action. It can't be mistaken for anything else, right? So from either low ready, low carry position, we're going to bring the gun up over our shoulder and dramatically bring it back in this fashion, right? Or we can do it from a retention position, which is bring it under and back out. And what that is it's a definitive gross motion that under night vision, under, a no noise discipline, it's a definitive motion that shows my buddy I'm ready for him to take an action, right? If it's something like simple as just dipping our muzzle or something like that, the problem with that is, constantly as we're moving through the house, we're checking angles. That can be very mistaken for, nothing. A very gross motion of this or this is then telling my partner like, oh, okay, he's giving me a barrel release. He's saying that he's signifying that I'm ready. He's ready for me to take an action.
So this is Josh says, so a barrel dip. And what Jesse's saying, no, not a barrel dip, because that could be mistaken for something. Mm-hmm. So you basically take it off of your shoulder, put the stock over your shoulder, and then bring the gun all the way forward, and then you bring it back to your shoulder, wherever it is.
There's also positions that are a little more advanced, which are called threat doors, where basically one guy's watching the line.
Let's not get in the weeds.
Well,
here.
It's important for the barrel release side, because in this context, you're not looking where your buddy's looking, right? Sure. So you may be looking forward, and your buddy's looking the opposite direction. And if he does some barrel dip over here,
never gonna.
Or I'm motioning him over here, like, go ahead. He's never gonna see that. Where if I'm already on his shoulder and I'm doing this gross movement. I was like, okay, my buddy behind me he's ready for me to go ahead and press forward. Okay, good. I'm gonna go into position. We're moving together. So
right. Yeah, you got to think like your buddy's got a plate carrier on. He's got a recondite rear bag or a flat pack on the back of it, right? Like the motion has to be enough that he feels that action under night vision, right? Because again, scalability of this platform. This thing has to also work when we're under 40-degree field of view. And you lose a lot of that, the motion if it's just a simple dip like that. And, your things are auto gain and they're super bright. Like you're losing a lot of that peripheral vision. Feeling that gross movement of his actual shoulder is going to definitely, let him know that, hey, he's ready for me to take that action.
Your favorite, going back a little bit, your favorite libertarian says, I definitely was verbally communicating too much, so much so that Tim suggested it was my, quote, defense mechanism. LOL.
I don't think that's a real thing, though. Like, I think you had to crawl, walk, run. And sometimes I think the talking through every single tiny little bit, it can get too much. Right? It can overload the processor, but it's also like, hey, when you say like, hey, the couch is purple, like that's annoying information. It's like, hey, okay, I'm going to turn here. Okay, so you go first, then I'm going to follow. That to me is like, okay, we're tracking each other in a learning capacity. And you'd see that there was two older guys that were with us, Dave and I forgot his name. Doesn't matter. But so toward the beginning, they were super chatty. They were still chatty toward the end, but they were way more chatty about how, what their next thing was and how they're going to move together, and not so much just talking about like, I'm in a kitchen with things in it and a spoon. So I think you do a lot of communication in that context. You have to.
Yeah, a lot of people want to talk through like next steps, right?
Yeah.
Whereas again, if your nonverbal communication was better and you guys both just had guns pointed at the things that you needed guns pointed at, right? Like then it wouldn't have to be like, okay, I'm seeing the top of the T, you're inside, I'm outside. You see where that starts to lose the efficiency, right? When we talk about pressure on the structure, yes, obviously, if priority of life is us and this is all we have and this is the speed that we're running at. But again, with more mat time, like that's the stuff that you're cutting out, right? Like his body language is going to naturally show that you're in the top of the tee. And as you start moving, you're like, we should be barrel releasing now. Yep, he did it. All right, I just fall in. But in the beginning, guys just, they don't trust their partner enough, right? So they think, hey, I've got this, but I don't know if this guy's got it. And instead of like using hold communication to make sure we're on the same page, they then just try to talk through the whole thing. Whereas if they kept it to just critical information, right? And they're like, hey, dead space here. Obviously, we're in the bottom of a T. Let's just go do the bottom of a T rather than like, yeah, okay, now you walk up, barrel release me, And again, this is just, it's all part of the learning path. In the beginning, we say like, yeah, there's no problem with communicating. But as the mat time progresses, what you see is that communication becomes almost nil, right?
Yeah.
Like,
so Josh
reports and barrel releases.
Sorry. So Josh says, so with context of people using the brain as a processor, I'm running an Intel 4004 and tier 1 are Windows 11.
See,
is that old? I don't even know what that means.
I want you to think of it in a different context, though. Like where we're saying there's so much more brain power because we haven't ingrained all that muscle memory. So exactly what Jesse's saying, like knowing, like, hey, seeing the way people are talking and doing it. Me and Joe are having to like think through like what shape is that? Where are the pieces, because we're not doing all the efficient pieces right yet. But it's same as like when you go first shoot a firearm, you're running through all the steps. Like, okay, I'm gonna breathe. Okay, I'm gonna aim. Like you're going through all that stuff, and then later on, you're like, oh, okay, pop, 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 pop. Like the same thing where you do enough repetitions and you start to understand it. But at the beginning, you are straight thinking about what's over there, what's my buddy doing, who's touching me, is he aiming? Where am I aiming at? Because you'll get yelled at about that because you aim at the wall like me. But like, there's so many things going on that you're thinking about that you're not even realizing that you're just straight up aiming at a black wall. Like, what are you looking at, buddy? Like, I don't know. I don't know, but I like what's on. Yeah. So Jesse, what are, just so we can kind of see some of the next stuff, how does the training pathway go? So kind of start us explaining people anatomy as a structure is a little bit more about what we did, and then where it kind of goes.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously anatomy of structures is basically the start. It's going to show you how to move in and around environments and places with people in them, with guns in your hands, how to start to make good decisions with guns in your hand. Our anatomy of structures diagnostic is kind of like the next step on that. Like, you're going to come in with the basic knowledge of having the procedures and principles, and from there it just gets more challenging on, transitional lighting to no light, using flashlight manipulation as a tool. Some of that goes into like obviously terrain features, right? Like in the anatomy of structures, we don't really go over stairs or stairwells and the different things that have to happen with that. Kind of the next step after those classes would be getting yourself into like a teams class, right? So that's going to then show you how this package starts to scale, not only to like a 5-man team element, which is, kind of your basic standard, but then running 3 5-man team elements. And from there, obviously, we have breaching courses out at Alliance Police Training. So like you would get into the breaching facility, because obviously the first principle of our CQB is have a fail-safe breach, right? If you can't get into the building, it doesn't matter what CQB tactics you have. And what we see is like 85% of law enforcement is failing in these ways. So you've got to have ability to get into structure, and then have ways to get into contested doors throughout this structure. Getting into a mechanical, thermal, and ballistic breaching class is obviously advised. Then it would be getting into hostage rescue, So again, in this context, we run a strong wall package, and that is because the priority of life is ourself going into this mission set, right? But what happens when that priority of life is above us? Now we have basically a different set of procedures of how we turn a strong wall into an opposing corners, and what then doing a more dynamic entry. Obviously, in anatomy of structures, we'll talk about hard breach versus soft breach, but this is where you start to get into the real context of hard breach because of priority of life behind the door. And again, this is obviously the next level of processor. You're trying to go into a room that has multiple targets in it. Obviously, a lot of time, you're isolating a crisis site. There's a lot of downtime at the door. So it just brings a whole nother level of challenges. From there, we have vehicle and
Ooh, that'd be fun.
vehicle assault classes. Again, I would recommend definitely getting into vehicle CQB with a Will Petty as well. Again, it's just another environmental class that's going to show you, it matches the principles and procedures of this CQB package well. But then it's also it's another class that teaches you that the environment actually dictates how you gunfight, right? Planet Motherfucker has a say in what this gunfight's going to look like. It's not the flat range for you, So we have advanced night vision classes, right? So that's that's kind of the culmination out at Alliance Police Training. So once you've been through this entire paradigm of training, you've had your basic CQB or Shoot House 1 anatomy of structures. You've then went through teams. You've had a TNVC night vision course or equivalent. You can then come to our advanced CQB Night Fighter, which is then 5 days of where we go out into the city. We have actual op missions, So Joe, who's the instructor down at Alliance, he's SWAT team commander down there. Again, he has access to the city. So, we'll go out to a couple of different facilities, houses. It changes every year. You'll spend about 40 hours under goggles. You'll do full live mission profiles. We've done explosive breaching on site. We've done on multiple buildings. So he always makes it really super cool. And you'll get to go out and, again, just experience what this package is, because it's very easy when you're at the anatomy of structures level and you just stay there, right? A lot of people, they see how hard this course is in the beginning and they're like, oh man, I don't want to progress to the next level until I feel like I have this level down, which is actually kind of a detriment, right? Because you don't then get to see what is the totality of the entire package to have then the full context of why it's important in two-man to do these things this way, because as it scales to this, but what we'll see is people want to get really good at that. Well, if you come to the same Shoot House class, I mean, bro, I probably did Shoot House 1 at Alliance 15 times because these other classes just didn't exist. Again, you got to think of the community that we've built since then, right? Before it was only Shoot House 1 until we had enough dudes that we could fill up a class that had enough people through Shoot House 1 that we could do an advanced Shoot House, right? And then you have to have enough dudes come through advanced Shoot House to be able to do the next level of class. So again, I'm talking, this is fucking 15 years almost in the making to be able to get to where now we have this crazy paradigm that you can kind of scale through the entire progression of classes. But in Shoot House 1, it's very easy to be like, am I good at Shoot House, or could I apply this to the real world? Am I good at just doing it here at MTAC or Alliance or whatever the Shoot House class we taught at? Or can I actually apply this? And I think as you progress to those other levels of getting to force on force and getting to being able to go out and actually have full target profiles and hitting houses in the city, you start to see okay, I can actually break the real world down to this. And that's what I encourage every student that comes through Anatomy of Structures to do, is they leave and then do what Walsh and they're talking about, is they'll break their house down, they'll break the grocery store down. That's how you stay good at CQB past doing CQB.
So there must have been something that you guys said about 5 minutes ago. Xeon Zone asked a question: with transitional light, do you think monos would shine? I don't remember the conversation, but does that question ring any bells for anyone?
Yeah, no. So obviously, he's talking night vision here, and
Yeah,
what I'll say from an operational context is, I think yeah, I mean, you can be super good under a mono, and I think like mono is the fighting man's kind of deal, especially dealing with transitional lighting. What I find more beneficial is duels that articulate, right? So now I can have the benefit of when we're under actual no light. And like I'm running my goggles at like basically a 45, so I just kind of have to look down to be in my goggles, and then with like vis override and white light. And again, you got to think of this in a domestic context. Like police can't just shoot dudes in the dark; they have to identify themselves as police officers. Otherwise, guess what? They get to shoot at you for free too. So like no real law enforcement agency, and it wouldn't be a good package if we weren't turning on white light to identify, right? Like again, this is the difference between like us and Delta is like Delta can run through complete no light and just murder people in the dark kind of deal. We can't do that, right? So as a
yeah,
citizen, like same deal. Like you're gonna have to like activate white light to get into this. But even if you're under nods and you're working transitional lighting, what I like about having the ability to keep both goggles is when I'm working in the darkness like that, obviously like you have a better sense of depth perception as with dual goggles, right? Like so you're able to walk and move in a much more natural motion than you are with just a single 14 without like tons of practice. Not saying it's impossible, but then what the articulating duals allows me to do is I can peel one up in transitional lighting. That then allows me to I can punch IR into places that especially like say we're working like city alleys and streets under nods, like you're going to have street lights and you're going to have a lot of photonic barriers there that unaided eye would be able to see that lighting, and then I can use like a high power illuminator to punch into those darkness zones with my
yeah.
abated eye, right? Like my nods eye. So I think duels for me, like I've run everything from panos down to a 14. And I think like the articulating duels is that sweet spot right now for operational use. I think if you can get used to running a 14 with a thermal, there's a little bit more like operational capability there. For a lot of people, it throws their brain a little funny. And like, I don't think the Cody systems are quite there yet with thermal overlay. But I think like in the future, obviously, like thermal will be a major part of night vision as well. So duels,
Well,
then 14, then probably quads.
Do you think quads are worth it? I know you and I've talked off camera before a couple times. Do you think quads are really worth it for the peripheral view you get over the weight?
I mean, I've used them on a couple of classes. Like the last class that we did a hostage rescue class, and I ran panos for that whole thing. And I will say that, some of the downfalls that I found was obviously like you can't get a manual gain on panos, right? Like, so it's throwing a lot of light at your eyes, and you have two extra sets of tubes, which is then going to cut your peripheral vision down even more. You do get obviously a little more field of view there, which is it's kind of nice, right? Like it's turning into that like three tube together kind of system. And I was able to run the goggles at like enough of an angle that I could easily look under them for white light or any of that. So I found that they were fine for operational use. Like I think the Nocturns, the ones that they have for storage, are a little bit better because it pushes that weight off. Once it's in the stowed position. That was the downside that I seen of the other bridge is like as I would flip it up, like the auto shut off on it was like pretty quick, which for me, like that's a little too quick. No, like it has a big tactile button on the front, but like, I need more than 2 minutes. Like obviously is like we're securing the crisis site or whatever the place. We're getting back to like last cover and concealment or, the position in the room where we're going to give our reports kind of deal. Like flipping your nods up and having them shut off and then having to turn them back on was a little annoying for me on the panos. And then obviously, like you have to then run the battery pack for it. So I like having duals that then have the battery on board. I can run that just how it is. And then if I'm doing like multiple cave jumps in Afghanistan, I can put a battery pack on and run for the next, fucking 90 hours or whatever. So
so
I think panos are cool. Like obviously from a marketing aspect, a cool guy aspect, like they're cool. I think operationally, probably duals are still where like, you're going to find the most benefit.
Pick it for
The
the cost.
articulating duels you're talking about.
Articulating, yeah.
Josh says, aren't they toying around with panos with a thermal overlay? Doc
Yeah,
Cypher says yes.
Yeah, that's the new smart systems you see. But you're talking insanely ridiculous money. Like,
Well, I saw panos on I think it was a Black Friday sale through TNVC that were $40,000.
yeah,
Like
Yeah,
going
that's
there.
O3.
yeah,
I think with like Nocturne, you can get them down to like close to 15 though,
15,
right?
yeah.
Like,
Which
yeah.
is good though. I mean, if you're talking duels for 9 and quads for 14, you're suddenly in the realm of like things making sense. Where before it wasn't making
It
sense. It
makes
was like,
sense.
well,
Like
like
I can either buy a car to get me to work, or I could
no,
buy
no,
panos.
no. Here's what I'm saying though. It was like you could buy a single PVS 14 for 3.5. You could buy duels for 12, or you could buy 4 for 40. Like, what?
Yeah.
Like, what math is this? Like, it doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense. So, I mean, it's all government contracts and fleecing the government as much as money
So
they can.
Xeon Zone says, have you guys tried the clip-on thermals, and what's your thoughts?
So,
You had some clip-on night visions, didn't you?
yeah, but I've done some clip-on. If you're talking about clip-on thermals on rifles and stuff, I found it did work well. But what Jesse was talking about is the running one eye thermal and one eye night vision. My brain doesn't do well with it. Like Jesse's talked to me a couple times before how when he runs this dual night vision, he runs one focus close and one focus far,
Yeah.
and that makes me want to throw up. Same with the thermal optic. It usually has a zoom of about 1.2, 1.3. It's not 1. So you have one
So it's a
eye.
little off, yeah.
It's a little off. So even when you see the thermal overlay, you think your brain's going to make sense of it, but it doesn't make sense to me, my brain.
So sorry if you guys didn't see that. Mission 7 Tactical says 40,000. I could hire the mafia to clear the room for me.
Yeah, that's it costs less money. Yeah, it's less money. It gets to pay someone else to clear it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what like a lot of people don't actually talk about in night vision is like the downsides of night vision, right? Like, I think that's what actually TNVC does really well in some of their like night fighter classes is showing you that like obviously the technology has come a really long ways since like the stargazing scopes of the
Yeah.
past. But there's also limitations to it, right? Like PID is actually quite hard under nods. Yeah, like the color red doesn't show under nods. So like doing medical assessments, obviously, like I think the benefit then of having the thermal and then the ability, like what all of it boils down to is seamless integration of technology with your procedures and principles, right? Like you have to have the ability to do it all. And that's kind of what training will show you is like guys will get lost in the weeds on what FOM they have on shit, and it's like, bro, like I can tell you, like I've got some Elbit tubes in my ULB NVDs. These are like the nods I use the most. Like we have DTNBS, we have fucking PVS 31s, right? Like we have all the nod sets, and I prefer these ULB NVDs, but like they have some fixed pattern noise. And if you don't know what that is, it's like it looks like chicken wire kind of if you look in. But these things are like incredible on FOM, and like I've used all of them. And what I'll tell you in an operational context is none of that shit matters. You know what I mean? Like, are you going to find environments that are too dark for your nods? Fuck yes, you are, right? Like, but here's the deal. If your gun's set up with a proper illuminator and shit, then, you're able to do it. But this is the deal. Like, you've got to be then fluent on that technology. That's where I think, like, the Maul has a standout over the Ingall. I've been running both. Actually, the Soma Gear Ingall, which has been way better than the actual Ingall. I'm sure we've talked about that, like breaking and shit. But yeah, Maul has very intuitive technology for the user, right? So what it allows is you to switch between low and high mode. Because imagine walking into a bathroom and having full blast fucking IR. Like, dude, it's gonna wash your nods out. Like, I don't care how shitty your nods are. It's gonna wash that out, right? You're not gonna be able to see shit. And then you're gonna try to look under your goggles and it's gonna be fucking pitch black, and you're like, what is going on? I can't see in the light and I can't see in the dark. So that's where you've got to be able to be seamless on your laser technology to be in a low IR, but then you're going to, in the same structure, I can go into a bathroom and then go into a warehouse bay that's 100 yards. You know what I mean? And good luck having your low mode going in there. It's going to step out 5 feet in front of you and just get eaten up by the environment, right? So I've got to be able to switch to high and fucking put out light. And then I've got to immediately, once I have to go white light, I would love some sort of visual aiming device, because not everybody has adopted the super high mount, which works really well under passive aiming for night vision. So it's like, I would love to have that vis override. So then you start to see the importance of like, and then you start to see like, none of these companies are actually doing it, right? Like the Ingall's usability isn't user intuitive, right? Like you have to know your settings pretty good, and it's like real easy to get to like vis high and IR high, but like if you needed high pointer high, you know what I mean? Like you have to know what your settings are from
1, 2,
clicks, because
3.
you're doing it in the dark. Whereas the mall, it's like a thumb button, from high to low, and then a lockout to super high. So it's like more user intuitive, but then they don't have Viz override. And guess what? Like most apartments aren't going to pay for dudes to have, like maybe the SWAT team has IR capable lasers and shit like that, but like your patrol cop just has a flashlight on his gun. So now
Right.
how do we link up in a building, you know what I mean, where I'm under night vision and you're under white light? And without principles and procedures, again, it just falls apart. So this is like, the system has been thought out to the utmost level. And as you get to see the totality of the package, you're like, oh my God, like, yeah, again, it just makes sense, right? And what it then does is it gives you a scope of view to look at every other CQB package. Like, I'm not telling you guys, like, this is the be all end all. I mean, I kind of am, because, like, I've got to take all the other training out there and I can directly compare most of them. And like I seen a dude in the comments saying he's about to go to Darcy. Like, you're gonna see a lot of this at Darcy. Like maybe one or two things are different, and like their chem light procedures and some of that stuff, but you're immediately going to see like, oh, I see what this guy was talking about. Like Darcy's a legit place, like, but that's because they're absolutely doing this and they're pressure testing it constantly.
Yeah, so Darcy is the Direct Action Resource Center, I think.
Yep.
Response Center, something like that. And the TUSC is it's like some tactical urban.
Oh,
or
sure. So he's not actually doing their operator package. He's doing like the Tussie is like the end of days kind of package that they have.
It's some like
it's
urban survival or something. Urban sustainment. Forgot what it is.
So one thing I want to chime in on that Jesse touched on that I think a lot of us get wrapped around the axle about, and I'm really trying to work hard in a lot of these night vision and IR reviews that, like you say, like don't get your head wrapped around the axle with FOM, how bright your IR is. Having a super bright IR may not be good, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's what we talk a lot about, but maybe you want to be able to transition and be able to punch out. But Jason and I went to a night vision course where there was just rented night vision. Everything, some things were handed out. There was a random assortment of IR illuminators. And the biggest thing I asked Jason, I was like, hey man, how many people couldn't see and how many people had an illuminator that didn't work? And we have a smorgasbord.
Here we are. We were talking a lot about PID, and if you had someone 50 yards away under like a dark, maybe the moon's out, but under nods, I would probably be hard. It would be hard to tell you if they had a gun in their hand or if it was a camera.
If you told me Jesse, hey, Jesse's on the perimeter, we haven't heard from him in a half hour, and there's a known bad guy in his perimeter, and 50 yards, you'd be looking at him and be like, I can't make that call.
Right. Bro, and 10 feet in the wood line, right? Like a guy could lay down 10 feet in the wood line in fucking white clothing, and under your night vision, you're not going to be able to see that guy, right? Under thermal, you'd pick him up in a quarter second. But this is the limitation of the technology. Like, it's a superpower, but there's limitations to it, right? And as long as you know those limitations, superpower,
it's like Superman's X-ray vision. Like, what good is it really? I'm kidding.
It allows you to see in the dark. Yeah, like that's it.
Josh says with thermal, you can see the person that has a gun or not.
Depends. I would say that highly depends. A 640 by 40 sensor or a 1080 sensor, maybe, but more than likely, no. Like between a cell phone and a phone and a gun, maybe. Like it depends on how close they are and the angles and things like that. Now, I want to give Jesse.
We're running short on time. We got about 5 minutes.
Let me say one thing real quick. He touched base on one thing where some classes were different, and I want to harp on something that Joe Terzo and I both. I think everyone in the class really thought was amazing, and I think Jason, you'll find this very interesting. Safety was such a paramount thing within the class, to the point where every single day, like, you really couldn't leave the class because they didn't want you to go out to your car. They didn't want you to go out to your car and accidentally grab a magazine.
Yeah.
You have a live mag there. So, I mean, you came in, they would clean the whole room. You check your buddy, you check yourself, you check your gear, you check your buddy's gear. They would check your gear, and if anything you had, like, I had the whole belt set up with like a hatchet and everything on it, like, just the ridiculous nonsense, right? And it's like, no, all this stuff's got to go. All that, a multi-tool, you're not gonna need it. Not gonna need that. And so there was just this constant regiment of safety, which made me really look at, okay, these guys are taking this thing seriously, and also that is the level you should demand from the classes you go to. Say, hey, how serious are these guys taking this class? Because that's how serious what we're doing is. Like, we could still get hurt in some of these classes if we're not
Yeah.
careful, and people could get seriously hurt. So I want to say that was a cool thing. Jesse, I want to just kind of give you just the floor for a last moment before we wrap things up. Where can people go to find more about defensive elements, defense mechanisms? When are some next classes? What's the future of defensive elements? Give them you got a couple minutes. Then
Yeah,
no,
obviously, go check out defense mechanisms, all the nylon gear, insulated apparel you guys, could need or want. Doing good things there. Defensive elements, always been a passion project, right? Like, none of us got into the game to be instructors. It's just kind of one of those things that you've been in it long enough, and my mentors have taught me, and I want to make sure that this knowledge is getting passed on to those who need it, right? And you see that from coming to a class. Very much what we're trying to do is build a community, and, like, it's a passion project, right? Like, no one gets into firearms training to become rich, because, like, it's not the path to success, right? What it is it's a skill set that, for people that actually need it and take it seriously, I want them to have a good source of information for it. So, just like me, right, I got bit by the bug, and I wanted to make sure that I was able to pass that information on as other people are getting out of the game, right? Like, again, people start to retire, they start to move on, and it's then up to the next generation to kind of bring that in and continue how to progress that forward. So, defensive elements, we obviously we work hand in hand with Alliance Police Training. So, if you're looking for a class, feel free to look at their schedule. I think they're out to like 2025 right now. So, try to jump in those classes if you can. We'll definitely be out there helping and assisting as instructors out there as well. And then for our own classes, defensive elements, you can go check out the website, defensiveelements.com. We have a couple of classes on. Obviously, we're just right now in the restriction of using other people's facilities. So, our goal for the next couple of years here, and kind of what we've been working on, is to get and solidify our own facility up near our headquarters here. So, if that's able to happen, hopefully within the next year, then we will definitely have a way more steady training schedule up. But as of now, like I said, the website's the best place. I know we have a class here July, I think 16th, 17th, somewhere in there. It's like mid-July for our diagnostic. Obviously, you have to have had our basic anatomy of structures to be able to take that class, or an equivalent. So if you take in an Alliance Shoot House 1 within the last year or two, we would also allow you in that class a Forge Tactical or Blue Force Gear kind of CQB class. That way you're just on the same procedures. But other than that, we're pretty much looking at 2025 for what will be the next classes. And again, obviously, it goes beyond just CQB, right? CQB is one aspect of the paradigm for sure. We do a lot of flat range classes that will get your pistol skills up and your rifle skills up, and give you a very introductory, to what is, kind of getting into that CQB level, right? We're teaching you ready and carry positions very early on, how to maintain accuracy. We also do force on force training, our Who Are You with a Gun class. Probably our most highly decorated class, but also one of our most intensive classes. Usually we only put them on one a year because role players, right? I've got to be able to get the standard cadre of role players also into position for it. It's a very ego class, right? Like you got to leave your ego at the door. But it's a class that if you conceal carry, if you're a law enforcement, you should very much show up to, because again, it just puts you through different scenarios and situations to see who are you when you walk out of the house with a gun on every day. And as I talked about earlier, it's kind of putting you in those situations where maybe it's for, it's not for all the marbles on the first time you run into this. So it very much will teach you kind of use of force. But yeah, that's it, man. Like, obviously I've got the main gig going with defense mechanisms, so that is the priority. But as much as we can, we're putting up classes on the schedule. We're hoping to make that a much larger part as we go forward here. But yeah, would love to see everybody out at a class, and thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, Jawa. Any last words, Walsh, before we wrap up here?
Just sharing that, big thanks to Jesse for coming out. Big thanks to having both me and Jawa out at the class. Like, we had such a good time, even getting beat up by him. Like, we learned so much from a perspective and gear, like training perspective, gear perspective, use perspective. It was awesome. I would love if more viewers come out. So keep an eye out for our schedule. If we're going to come out to more classes or organize more stuff with defensive elements, hopefully we can do a bunch of that in the future. We can come out with us, because like having Joe out was awesome. I'd love to bring him with, and then see. Like, Jason, I want to see you and Joe just like struggle bust through it. Just like, I remember that day. I was there. I was at that. I had that exact feeling on that day.
That's how we build community. Is like, I can't have these failures by myself. You got to come experience this.
You got it. Yeah. Like, you did that. Well, you did that scenario. Yeah, I screwed that up too. I remember when I screwed that up. So,
Forever Libertarian says, thanks again, Jesse.
Yeah, big thanks to Nate for coming out too. He had a good time. I got a video coming out on Sunday talking about some of the benefits. A lot of what we talked about today, why everybody should take a CQB course. A lot of the conversation we had here. So it'll be good. Feel free to come on Discord, join me and Java. We do a lot of Ready or Not. If you want to just see some of the basic stuff we're talking about, we'll teach you some basic shapes, kind of baby step you into it because we play some games and do some stuff, and then maybe go into a class, maybe intro you to it, and kind of build into that too. So you can come play with us too. Yeah. Michael Farley, you will love it. I will gladly record it. I will watch all of you fail.
Awesome, guys. Well, again, thanks so much. Appreciate you guys being here, and we will catch you next Thursday. Adios.
Later, everybody.